we hear that King Herod was troubled at the news of a newborn king. For us, for the world, this is good news. But Herod was that kind of leader who was jealous of his own power and probably afraid it could be taken from him. So Herod was troubled, resorts to violence. All Jerusalem troubled with him. We live in a troubled world, and we could say that most any year, but 2020, with the pandemic and chaotic politics, our country, our world is certainly troubled. 2020 might have felt like the worst, was the worst in a long time. But was it? I came across a newspaper article about this, and someone had asked historians what they thought the worst year ever was. A medievalist said, well, certainly 1348, 200 million people died from the Black Death. And that was in a world that only had about 500 million people. A 20th century historian said, well, certainly 40 to 45, the dark days of the World War. A historian of American history said, in the United States, it was 1862, the darkest year of our Civil War. And another one, rather to my surprise, mentioned May 1962. I was in 5th grade then, but I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, the real fear that the world would end, that we would be blown up tomorrow. And they had us doing these crazy little drills where we hid under our desks if the bomb came. Well, we can look back to a time that seemed especially bleak and gain some perspective. Often we only get these lessons much later when something else happens. In 1986, there was a very disturbing television movie called The Day After. And it got me thinking of those 7 days in May 1962. The day after is not so much about the nuclear war, but the after effects. It focuses on the miserable survivors, refugees slogging it along, looking for any place that might be a haven, fearing radiation sickness, fearing violence from desperate people around them. But I most remember a very powerful prayer scene. The preacher spoke directly to their grim reality, and he read from a little-known prophet, Habakkuk. Though the fig tree blossom not, nor fruit be on the vine, though the yield of the olive fail, and the terraces produce no nourishment, though flocks disappear from the fold, and there are no herds in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord and exult in my saving God. I learned something about perspective on the first Earth Day. I was a freshman in college. Earth Day, I don't know who invented that or how it became a thing, but it early on draw our attention to a crisis in slow motion, ecological crisis. I remember a lot of talk, a lot of paranoia about overpopulation, lack of resources for so many people. The earth is doomed unless. And the main solution we heard was zero population growth. Haven't heard that in a long time, I'm glad. Now, since it was a Sunday, I showed up for Mass, and Father Phil, my campus minister, who always liked to talk about current events in the sermon, was struggling with a contradiction. Because on this Earth Day, we had a baptism to celebrate. Well, Father Phil broke it open with a story about a broken elevator. I don't know if he himself was in this elevator, but he described it well. It was crowded, quickly became hot, intense, grumbling. But then someone told a joke. There was laughter. Somebody told another joke. There were great little stories and comments about life. And people who were used to ignoring each other on the elevator briefly connected. Even a few office friendships came of it. And suddenly the elevator didn't seem quite so crowded. The question that Father Phil left us that day, the day we welcomed baby into our world and into our church, was, what is too crowded? The lesson. When we receive a child with faith, when we share our stories and Jesus' story, we make room in the world. We recognize new life. Now, when we have to live through threat of annihilation, a pandemic, ecological and climate disasters, earthquakes, there's all sorts of crises. Even in those times, we must remember to baptize a baby with joy, plant a tree with hope, plan a wedding, rejoice in our saving God. Jesus was born into a tense situation. There was no room for Mary and Joseph. And then there's a plot to kill him. Jesus and Mary and Joseph flee. They're refugees. Yet, also in the stories of the birth of Christ, there's news of great joy. The angels sang, "Glory to God in the highest." And some rough types, shepherds, come to see this wonder, a child born. They share the joy. And then, very unexpected visit from exotic magi, bearing gifts, giving homage. Hope is more than a feeling. Put together with faith, we can put that into action. Welcome to a new year. In an insecure world where Mary and Joseph had to scoop up their baby and run for their lives, in a world where Jesus came to suffer so that we might have life, there is good news. There is a reason to rejoice in our saving God. So, welcome to a new year. Can it be a year of faith, a year of hope? If we tell our stories of faith, plant trees, welcome babies, and give thanks to God in all things, then yes, it can be a year of renewed hope. And even in moments when we feel trapped and afraid, when we can't see how things can possibly turn out well, or the present trials could end, we will find ways to rejoice in our saving God.